What if French was Old Norse instead of being the French we know? How would you approach it? How would you do things differently? Hi, my name is Chris of OuiCommunicate. I'm a French teacher. I teach adults who want real fluency, and I want to share a simple idea with you today. Let me ask you this. If French was some obscure version of Basque or Piedmontese or Old Norse, would you still want to speak it at all costs? Or would you naturally feel more inclined to study it properly, to understand the sounds, the conjugation and the grammar? In today's society, we're seeing a double trend that I think is negatively impacting language learning. Well, the first is instant gratification. We want everything now, including languages. This was certainly accelerated by Amazon, instant delivery, instant everything. And I think that one bled into the other. And in languages, of course, the trends today is speak from the first class onwards, speak like a native within 30 seconds, or, well, let's be realistic, let's speak like a native within 5 minutes. Okay, sounds good. And these two things together are a very bad combination and negatively impact your learning of French. The thing is also that the perception of French influences how you wish to learn it, and it's the same thing with English. We perceive French to be a certain type of language that's not meant to be studied, it's rather meant to be spoken, because the problem is familiarity. On top of the two trends I just mentioned, instant gratification and speak like a native, there's also the problem of familiarity. So when a student approaches French, they often think that they're walking into a language that's quote-unquote close enough to English. They recognize a few sounds, they've heard it in the movies, and they figure, well, how hard can it be? But this is a trap, because this false sense of familiarity makes learners skip the groundwork. They skip the foundation. And I've seen it again and again and again and again, and I could repeat the word again 50 times because I've seen it 51 times. And I've seen it too many times to mention. Skipping the groundwork. People want to talk straight away without understanding how French actually works. But ask yourself, if this was Old Norse instead of being French, would you be more respectful? Would you expect to take your time to study the sounds, to learn the grammar carefully, and build up to speaking it? French feels close to English because of the shared Latin roots. School exposure also would be an influence, and the cultural presence of French. But this illusion tricks learners into thinking that French can be quote-unquote picked up. But in reality, French is a system. Like any language, it's a structurally rich, sound-sensitive, rule-driven language. And those rules matter rather a lot. So why does speak at all cost fail you? There are many reasons. And I don't think I've ever met a conversational learner, be it English or French, who didn't have to backtrack and go back to the basics. I've never met one, simply never met one. Most language learners today are sold the idea. It's not your fault, you're sold the idea, and I was sold it too as an English teacher. The idea that you can speak from day one and that it's a lot better, and it sounds really motivating, but in practice it creates a very, very harmful dynamic, and here's why. Because first of all, there's a sense of shame that sets in. The students feel like they're failing if they don't speak French fluently straight away, start to feel a bit foolish, they avoid grammar, second negative influence. So explaining the structure to them suddenly feels like they're admitting failure. If you backtrack back to grammar, it feels like they're failing, you know, they feel they should be speaking it naturally. So it really feels like stepping backwards. And also they default to a certain mimicry. So instead of mastering the system, understanding it as insiders, they repeat rehearsed phrases and avoid risks. And the result most often is that they plateau and they get stuck in sort of travel French mode, or they recycle the same skills they've always had, and they don't know why they're saying what they're saying. They stay insecure. But imagine instead that you're learning Basque, Old Norse, Piedmontese, obscure languages, Would you walk into this experience expecting to chat in the first week? Probably not. You instinctively expect to study the sound system carefully. You'd want to learn the verb conjugations methodically, and you'd want to build knowledge before performance. In short, you'd show deference to the language, you'd show more respect. And this sense of respect, this deference, is exactly what's missing from French learners' minds today. But it's exactly what you need for success. And my solution to this problem, to bring about quality learning of French, is treat it like it was Old Norse. I've always done this in one form or another. So at OuiCommunicate, I teach French with depth and clarity, the same depth and clarity that you'd use for a language like Old Norse. Not because French is ancient or obscure, it's not Latin, but because it deserves that kind of respect. And besides, you'll need it. And it's not even a question of how fast you can speak. If you haven't learned the foundations, you will have to backtrack and learn them later. And that's much harder, because once a bad habit has been picked up, it's very, very hard to correct a bad habit. It's easier to pick up a good habit than to correct a bad one in language learning. And you know, when I used to teach English as a second language, I used to do that because I'm also a qualified teacher of English as a first and as a second language, as well as French, which makes my classes super cool, because you're learning from someone who's a native of both, but also teaches both. But I've seen this same, what we might call shame barrier, even more intensely in English learners, and it's awful, because English is dreadful to teach as a language, because it's so much more complex than people realize. But there's also the feeling that people should be speaking it, and it becomes a matter of shame to not be able to speak it properly. So the second you go back to grammar, people just shut down, don't want to know, because they feel they should be speaking it. They start to feel really ashamed if you start to explain basic things. You can feel it's not what they paid for. They paid for an English conversation. They didn't pay for a grammar class. They don't want to know that. They're well beyond that. They don't want to know. That's just the modern trend. And I was sold this idea also as an English teacher. Oh, the modern English class, we just speak, it's student focused, we just speak and don't worry about the grammar. Well, in the meantime, you can hardly teach it anymore. So in that respect, English is a lot worse than French, but it's the same sort of phenomenon, this perceived familiarity. It's a language I should be speaking rather than learning, because English is the global club, and adults feel that they should already know it. So the moment, of course, I try to explain grammar, they shut down. And what's interesting is that on top of the shame factor, it also feels that like they're not learning, and these students really perceive it like, yeah, but grammar, that's abstract, that has nothing to do with real life. I shouldn't be doing grammar, I should just be speaking it, and don't worry, I'll understand my mistakes. The more I do it, the more I understand, and I'll just pick up on things. And I think learners think that also. So it doesn't feel like learning if I explain things in slow motion in English classes, and I think they feel exposed, which is also a thing also. You know, it feels like they've been caught naked. They feel exposed, they feel they've failed. You know, they're going back to their school days. Yeah, it's like being caught naked if you explain things in slow motion in the English class, and I think also in the French class in a lesser measure. But once we start to see grammar as a superpower, which it really is, if you start to see grammar as a superpower and create a safe learning space with modesty, because learning is modesty, you have to be modest, you have to admit that you don't know, and you're ready to be taught, and you're ready to learn. Well, then the shame starts to lift, the shame disappears, and this is when real progress can begin. So to conclude on all this, I really want to hammer it in. Well, French isn't a toy. It's not a phrase book. It's not something you'll learn in an app. It's a complete system with a logic, with sounds, with a musicality, with beauty also. There's a certain aesthetic to French. And if we treat it like Basque or Old Norse, with reverence, with patience and curiosity, we will speak it better than 90% of the people out there. I guarantee that it's beyond debate, beyond debate. It's not a theory, it's what I see in my own classes. So to conclude this video, I hope it was useful to you. I think we must stay aware that there are trends in language education. We're part of a certain zeitgeist, right? The thinking of our times, we all are. If we're unfortunate, I think a lot of language learners are unfortunate, is that thinking of our time values speaking from the first 5 seconds onwards, speak like a native, or instant gratification. I want it now, things should be easy, I don't want to struggle, I don't want to push any sort of resistance. It's unfortunate because it's the spirit of our times, it's the thinking of our times. So the second you want to learn French with intent, my name's Chris from OuiCommunicate. If you want to master French, if you want to understand it as an insider, find me at OuiCommunicate.com. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was useful. See you very soon in a French class. Bye.